This is the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group bi-weekly meeting for May 11th, 2017. Already half of the way through May. Things are going crazy. We got Build going on out in Seattle, which is really exciting. So do check out some of those recordings, some of those events as they come online. Really exciting announcements around Graph, around AI. Some really cool stuff happening out there. Of course, SharePoint as well. Great announcements. But so do check that stuff out. Really encourage you to watch those sessions as much as you can. It really talks about the upcoming Microsoft ecosystem, the whole thing. So some really neat stuff. But for this call, we're here to talk about the SharePoint framework and JavaScript client-side development in general as it relates to SharePoint. So we sit under the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And what the purpose of this call is to kind of reduce the scope down a little bit and have a discussion specifically around SharePoint framework development, SharePoint framework best practices or patterns, and then client-side development in general, and as well the JavaScript core component that we work on as part of this call and to help folks out with their SharePoint-related client-side development. So two links down there at the bottom. The first one, the aka MS SPPNP-community, will take you to the Microsoft Tech community, and that is a great place to ask questions or get help or feedback around ideas and also provide us feedback. And then the next link, dev.office.com/SharePoint, is your one-stop shop for all things SharePoint development. Whether you're doing new SharePoint framework development and want to learn about that, there's some great tutorials and walkthroughs there. And also, if you're doing add-in development or the classic sort of WSP development, we're moving all our development-related or SharePoint development-related resources to that landing page. So that will be your launch pad for all things SharePoint development. So do check that out as well. And so moving into what are we going to be working on in today's call, we've got a great agenda with some really cool demos from Vesa today, a little preview of some of the stuff he's going to be talking about at Build either later today or tomorrow. But we'll start with a quick update on the JavaScript core component. We'll go over the SharePoint framework latest, then we'll go through those demos, and then we should have some time at the end like we try to do for open discussion, and we can always, of course, have the discussion as well in the IM window. So welcome, everybody. Just a reminder of ways to participate in sort of this call and in the sort of special interest group sub-community. Demo a web part. It could be a SharePoint framework web part. It could be just a client-side development web part, something JavaScript. It could be something using Node and the JavaScript core library. Anything around that kind of client-side development. Really want to give folks an opportunity to demo on this call. We've had some great demos in the past from folks in the community. I know I've learned a lot from those. So if you are working on something cool, do please reach out to us. Would love to give you a platform to demo your work. And I really think everybody in the community benefits from that. So I think you benefit from a chance to present, and we all benefit from a chance to learn from you. So do reach out. Would love to have you demo something on this call. You can also contribute on GitHub, so you can contribute through pull requests, submitting issues, all those sorts of things. We really welcome feedback. Feedback really drives what we do. And then that last block, provide us that feedback, and that can be through a GitHub issue channel, that can be through the Microsoft Tech community, that could be through Twitter, but that feedback really helps us and drives us and lets us know what's important to those of you in the community and those of you who are using the things that are being produced, and helps us kind of tailor those and move those so they're even better and more useful as we go forward. So a quick update here on the JavaScript core component. The 2.05 release went out Monday. Give that a try. Upgrade if you haven't in a while. I've got a lot of people are still on 1.06, so encourage you, update to 2.05. Give it a spin. Let us know some feedback. Got a bug reporter this morning, so we'll take a look at that. So if you find anything, do check that out. Pardon me, my allergies are really bad the last couple days. So again, we are looking for feedback on new features and things that would be helpful. That's really what drives each release is feedback and hearing from folks about what would be useful. For example, for the last release, somebody came along and said, why don't you guys support those static utility methods such as send email and things like that? And I said, there's no reason we don't. So we did, and we do now in the 2.05 release. So those are the kind of things we love to hear from you, things that might be missing or things we can make easier. Let us know. Starting in my head and on paper to sketch out support for graph and how is that going to sort of shape up. I've got some ideas there. We've got a great thread. If you have thoughts as well, please do share those in the thread and let us know. Exciting growth numbers for April. I'll show you guys some graphs here in a second for the core library, but really excited to see the numbers keep growing and the number of requests keep growing. And then just a thing for me, please reopen issues in GitHub if you're continuing the discussions. I don't always see the emails. I'm actually an admin across a lot of our repos, so I get tons of emails, and I don't want to miss if you have further questions or want to keep a discussion going. I definitely don't want to miss that. I want to be able to respond and let other folks respond. So please reopen those issues for visibility so that they're just not missed. Nobody's trying to ignore anybody. It's a lot of streams. So just reopen the issues. We'll see them, and we can continue those discussions. So yep. SharePoint community links down at the bottom, again, get you to the SharePoint community, and then the Gitter channel is also a great resource if you're looking to have quick questions about using the JavaScript core component library in particular. That's a great place to just get some quick feedback and let us know if you have a question. So just to go over the usage numbers real quick, we did make an update to the report, so it's now time sensitive, so we've got the year and the month, so you can see the nice trend. And I want to go kind of start in the top left, and you can see the usage for March, April, and May. And so we've gone up from 14 million requests out of 615 tenants in March to 18 million requests out of 871 tenants in April. And this is for approximately the first week in May. We've already got 13 million requests out of 610 tenants. So really exciting growth, and I want to say thank you to all of you who are helping to drive that growth and are using the library and projects and giving us the feedback on how that's going. So really appreciate that, and also really excited to see that this is something folks are finding useful. So do check it out if you haven't. Below that is a graph. This is sort of over time, so you can see it's been a steady growth, and I think a fairly impressive growth as we've gone from August 2016, where we started tracking, all the way now through April was final, and then like I said, that's just the first week in May. We're already just about at the March numbers, a little shy. So really excited to see that growth, and that's due again to you guys in the community, so thank you very much for helping to drive that. And I also wanted to include on the right there is the number of requests by country, and I've sorted it by the number of requests. So instead of the number of tenants, by number of requests, which I thought was interesting to see. Australia is leading everybody with just shy of, or I guess 3.6 million. Spain's at 3.5 million out of just 18 tenants. And then the U.S. can only muster 3.2 million out of 218 tenants. So I thought that was really exciting to see those numbers kind of spread out and not just focused, in this or that country. So really exciting to see the broad usage as well around the world. Really exciting stuff. And again, thank you to all of you in the community. Really appreciate it. So with that, I believe we're ready to turn this over to Vesa, and we will let him give us a quick update on SharePoint Framework.
Thank you, Patrick. So I don't know how many of you actually followed or noticed yesterday, but we already released a blog post around the modern extensibility or SharePoint Framework extensibility, which essentially means extensibility points for SharePoint Online. And we are demoing this later today in build, and why not actually show this one as a exclusive pre-peek for you guys in this call who are participating. And that's what we want to do with this special intro scope as well, making sure that you get and gain value out of these calls, and making sure that we're sharing stuff immediately when possible. That blog post, which is kind of mentioning these changes, is in a dev.office.com/blogs. It's one of those which went live yesterday, related on SharePoint Online and OneDrive. But now, let's actually move on a few slides. And that's the link, yes. Thanks, Leo. And David as well. So a few things what I wanted to, before we go there. On this week, Monday, we released a nice webcast related on SharePoint Framework and how to call external APIs. I was kind of thinking maybe we would do a demo on this one for this week, but maybe we'll do that for following special intro scope because we have something exclusive to show. But this is actually a super interesting webcast and a super powerful pattern because it is actually enabling you to do elevation of privileges. It is enabling you to access on premises. It is enabling you to do whatever you want in SharePoint Online in a secure way. So please do have a look on that webcast if you're looking into how to make this happen. In the webcast, we're securely calling from SharePoint Framework web part a Azure function. And then the Azure function is returning a value as well. A relatively simplistic demo, but the opportunities around this one, this pattern is massive, and it kind of breaks through the barriers of SharePoint Framework as well. Because SharePoint Framework is mainly what we're delivering from engineering. SharePoint Framework is a UI framework, at least for now. And then quite often you need to call on in a secure way your custom web API to make something additional happen. And we'll walk through that one and one key point to mention on that one as well, without ADAL.js or MSA.al. So how do we securely call that channel between SharePoint Framework client-side web part and the Azure endpoints? Now, have a look on the webcast. It actually walks through the things. We do have a simplistic example on that one as well. It is missing the Azure side. We'll work on the guidance. There's articles coming up on this one as well slightly later. Now, moving on other things. Let's see if my screen is updating. Why isn't it updating? One step forward. Now, let's actually move into those announcements, which we did yesterday. And apparently the styling is slightly, why is it orange? I don't know. So now what we're releasing pretty soon to dev preview, and what we're demoing today in this call and also in build, is the SharePoint Framework extensions. And this is a good example. This is the picture which is in a blog post as well, showing actually those extensions live or in the screen as well. So you're able to create three kind of extensions or customizers, so to say. The number one customizer, or the first customizer, is the application customizer. An application customizer is basically the same as user custom action in site collection or site or in list level. And technically, from an API perspective, you are actually, we are taking advantage of the user custom action, existing user custom action APIs on the background, but then we are hooking into that user custom action to a application client component ID, which has to be then hosted in the app catalog. So essentially, the process is exactly the same as client-side web parts. If you're familiar with those, you need to first deploy your customization to the app catalog, and then after that, in the sites, you can actually reference that using a few different options. The second customizer is command sets customizer, and this is more around, hey, I want to have a button either in the toolbox or in the context menu, which should execute code. As an example, you want to open up let's say a pop-up, which is asking if you're selecting two items in a list, you want to set up a pop-up, which is then asking something related to items or whatever is your use case, what you want to do. So. And so that's kind of a more on the button extensions. And the third one, which isn't super visible until I actually show that and explain that, is the field customizer. And the field customizer refers to classic JS link capabilities, but it's implemented again in a slightly different way, so that we have that centralized control in a tenant when we're deploying these customizations to SharePoint and SharePoint Online. And what it essentially means is that you're able to, in the first release, in the dev preview when we start, it only actually it's valid when we are in a read-only mode, but we're looking into getting to the edit mode as well. And you're able to essentially control how the field value is being rendered. So just as well, you could actually access if the field value is a map, let's say an address, you could show a map. If it's something else, you can show whatever. And it's actually up to you what you want to render. The application customizer, which is the panel, which is marking the panel on top. So let's be clear on that one as well. So you do not have to do UI level modifications. It could be a Google Analytics. It could be whatever analytics which you're hooking into the SharePoint Online side. So it could be a JavaScript which is not visible for the end user. Or you can actually, within the application customizer, you can call a request from a SharePoint framework that, hey, give me an instance or access to the footer section or header section. And then SharePoint Framework will give you an object, which is the header section, and then it's up to you whether you actually want to render over there. So again, you have full control on that div on the header section. When we start, we'll start with a header section and header, let's say, marker on top, but we're looking obviously into having footers, left side navigation positions, and all of those additional locations as well. So within your code, you can easily kind of hook into different UI elements within a SharePoint, and we'll guarantee that those elements will be there in the future as well, regardless of the UI changes what we're making. And that's really the key difference if you think about the classic, let's say, user custom action, because the classic user custom action relied on, if you are doing UI elements modifications, it relied on page DOM structure modifications. And if you do a change in the DOM structure in the SharePoint Online, your customization might get broken. So this is more future-proof way of doing those customizations. And answering on Leo's question as well, so these are absolutely available in the modern experiences. So the modern lists, groups, modern SharePoint sites, and all of that is working properly. And when we start, we'll start with in the field customizer site, we'll start with the read-only, let's say, manipulation. We are absolutely having that field customizer to be able to override to editing experience as well. And that's related on Stefan's question on the iron window. So essentially, the whole point is that we want to enable those typical scenarios where you were using JS Link, user custom actions to modify the site, to have more control, have, let's say, top header sections which are fully customized, footer sections in the future, and so on. So we're finally getting out of the limitations with the groups or modern SharePoint site, whatever we want to call them. So. And this is meant to be in the modern experiences, at least when we start. So we're looking into enabling some of this also in the classic, but it might be that you need to fall back on the classic models with that one. When we start, it will be only in the modern list experiences and modern group, modern experiences. But again, that's a start as a dev preview, and then when we go closer to the GA, the capabilities are still getting changed and modified. Now, technically, coming back on the classic and modern experiences as well, you can still use the classic JS link in the classic experience, and then if that list is being rendered in the modern experiences, it will actually flip automatically to the modern extension. That's one option to make that happen as well. Now, let's actually have a look on what else did I actually have on this one. So this is just a list of things, and from a terminology perspective. So we do have an application customizer, which, like mentioned, you can do associations in a site collection site or in a list level and associate that JavaScript to be executed on those. Whatever that JavaScript does, that's up to you. or you can have a command set customizer, which is related on action buttons, or then field customizer to embed JavaScript code when a field is actually being rendered in a UI. Now, cool. Let's actually have this one live. I'm just looking into Russell's question. Will we be able to set global nav by an application customizer? Well, there's no override of the existing nav, but you can absolutely render a global navigation across all of your site collections using the application customizer. So that's absolutely doable. So it's just a matter of hooking up your code in there. But let's actually have a look on this. Now, I do apologize, I only have one screen, so I cannot follow up on the questions while I'm doing the demo, but I'm going to walk through some of the things and explain how they're happening. And let's get back on the questions after the quick demo as well. Good. So let me share my desktop. And just double checking that somebody is saying, yes, I can see. Good, excellent, thank you. If Stefan got it, it went across the world as well, so that's good. Now, where do we actually want to start? Let's actually start with one thing which I didn't actually have a slide. So one thing what we're putting into dev preview pretty soon as well, let me actually jump in here, is a new capability related on our web parts as well. So as part of the dev preview, which will start pretty soon, you're able to create connections between the web parts. So you are able to create associations like a list and details list or details experience. So let me create a new quick page. Let's start with that one and get back on the extensions in a second. So creating a new page, let's call this SIG demo. And let's actually add our first web part here, which is our training list web part. So training list web part is a React-based web part, which is listing trainings from one of the lists within the site. And I can actually filter this one. So if I want to do rafting, it actually filters that dynamically, or forest, or do I have a desert? No. Advanced, or I'm interested in advanced things. Now, wouldn't it be cool if I would be able to have multiple web parts on a page, and then when I'm selecting one of these, I would be able to present additional details. And that's essentially what the web part connections are giving us. So let me add that additional detailed web part here, and there we go. And there's my additional details web part, and let's save the page, and we can actually see how it works in practice. So now if I list, or let's say, let's do rafting, and I can click a rafting.
Hello. We're not able to see the screen. It says some error, and it says rejoin presentation.
Okay, so that seems to be now, because many are saying that it's fine for them. So you probably need to, would be good to restart. And if that does not still work, or there could be a bandwidth issue. So the recording of this one will be live tomorrow in the YouTube channel. So you're able to actually have a look on that after that.
Okay.
Good. So, if I'm clicking something in this list of things, I can see actually the details being reflected on the other web parts. So you're able to see that we're moving between the locations. So the map is moving, some key codes are moving, and the images are moving. So let's do forests and click that one. So we can actually see that this is managing in the forest at Finland training. So, or whatever. So this actually works relatively fast and relatively fluently. Right now, the communications is being done using code. So there's no UI where the end user would be actually doing the association. But we're looking into having that one in the future as well. So you're able to, as an end user, if there's web parts which are supporting the same, let's say, interface, you're able to do the associations by yourself and build the page by yourself. We're also looking as not directly as part of SharePoint Framework, but as part of SharePoint Engineering, we are absolutely looking into addressing the classic request and classic challenge around modern pages, which is that modern page has only one canvas, so this web part has to be always from top to bottom. But obviously, everybody wants to have multiple columns, and that's coming up, and we're building on that one as well. So that's in the roadmap. I can't give you an exact date on that due to numerous reasons, but you'll see announcements on that one later on. Good. On this one, just to quickly maybe show how it's being done. So let me actually get to those web parts. There's my list web part, and this is really nothing more than doing communications between these two web parts. And I'm looking in the wrong location because it's in components. And where do we actually have that? No. And I can't find it. One moment. Maybe it was actually in the web part site still, and I just missed it. There's my properties. There's my React component creation. There's the list helper. Why am I being blind? Okay, it's not in the web part. Then it was in the component. And no, that's React. Am I being blind? No, no. On filter changed, selected value. Where do we actually get with this one? Oh, interesting. I can't find my. Oh, there we go. Training item, obviously. So good. So in here, if we zoom in on this one, so the actual raising an event is basically nothing more than raising an event with a unique ID. Through SharePoint Framework. You, as a developer, you can define the data object. So in this case, we're just adding and sending the list item as part of the data object to the other web parts, which might be interested on this event. And we can give a source ID as well. Right now, the target ID doesn't have any meaning. It might change after the dev preview as well. We'll see how that's working in the future. So this is essentially the web part which is saying, hey, I've been selected. If there's anybody on the page who's interested on this particular event, here's the data which was selected from my side. And now the details web part is essentially then just subscribing those events. So let me go to the React component. And where do we have the subscribing of the event? There we go. In the component did mount, we're saying, hey, SharePoint Framework, if anybody is raising this kind of an event in the SharePoint Framework side or in the page, please call this endpoint or this method. And if we get to this one, it's nothing, just a typical TypeScript function, which is then getting the data object as part of it, and it can process that any way it wants. So relatively simple process for now, but it's actually natively supported through SharePoint Framework as we move along, which obviously opens up additional scenarios and models as well. Now let's get to those extensions. So I'm going to flip back on the browser, and I'm going to use my pre-created already list, which has a lot of those extensions already available. So this is a custom list which has a, well, actually, let's do a small modification on this one. So let me edit the current view, and let me show you this one in practice. So I'm going to drop emergency contact, and I would ask people to mute because now there's quite a lot of overlapping noise. Probably Patrick helped on that one. So this is let's say a classic, a typical SharePoint list. And within this list, right now we're listing people who are who have signed on to these training classes within the Contoso Adventures. Now, if you want, this is essentially kind of a simplistic scenario. If you want to expose some of, let's say, semi-confidential data, like the phone number or emergency contact, I can get those being visible on the page. So let's actually get the whole list of items. And immediately when those fields are visible in the view, the SharePoint will realize that, hey, actually, those fields have associated They have a custom field customizer. They have a custom field customizer associated to them. So it's going to actually ask that field customizer to render the output. And this particular field customizer is relatively simple. It essentially just hides the value unless I'm actually interested on the value. So if somebody's sneaking behind of your back and having a look on the list of phone numbers, they're getting hidden. But absolutely, it's up to you. How do you want this functionality to behave? So you as a developer, you have full control on this div, which is rendering the value of the field itself. And as a developer, you get access on other field values in the row, you get access on the list and the context and everything else. And I'll show that one in a practice in a second. Now, the second thing that we have visible in the UI is also the high-level top navigation, the header, which is done by Application Customizer. And this particular case, the Application Customizer is essentially there realizing that, hey, by the way, this contains sensitive information, please handle it accordingly to company guidelines. Because the Application Customizer realized that within the page, we have fields which have this field customizer on it, so it's actually enabling itself as a implementation. But that's basically a modern user custom action, if you're familiar with that concept from the past, except that it has been implemented using the SharePoint Framework, and it's also using the modern way of associating itself on the site. Now, I'll quickly run through some code, and I'll quickly then kind of explain how did we hook in essentially the field and the user custom action on the page, and then we can move back on the questions, because I can imagine that there's a few questions on the queue. Let's start quickly on the updates of let's say the Yeoman template. So if I create a quick sample folder. And then I do yo Microsoft SharePoint. We actually are running, in my case, I'm running a early build from the engineering because obviously I have access on the daily builds. But this one already has been modified to support the extensions, but just to show you what it actually means in practice. So solution name is sample, and I'm probably quite often using React, and that's already a new question. Which type of client component to create, a web part or an extension? If you choose the web part, it will be the classic mode and classic steps with the web part creation. If I choose extension, it's going to request me, okay, cool, what kind of extensions do you actually want to create? And then I can choose to start with, for example, with the Application Customizer. And obviously, I can add multiple customizers and web parts on one solution as well. Absolutely suitable model. And then it's asking the Application Customizer name, and the following thing would be the description, and then it would actually create the scaffold the project for me. I'm not going to do that because for those who've been trying to have been doing that in the past, they know that it takes quite a few minutes to actually get the scaffolding, initial scaffolding completed. We're not going to wait for that one in this code. But let me show you what you're actually getting. So you're getting a normal, let's say, SharePoint Framework solution. It looks exactly like the solution if you're familiar with client-side web parts. So it has exactly the same basic structure, write manifest, package solution, and all of that. And then if I extend the sources, we just have a new folder called extension. And in there, it's going to scaffold us the default structure and the default model, for example, for Application Customizer in this particular case. So Application Customizer, just showing quickly how you actually hook in the things as well. So all of these customizers, they do have a base class, which is giving you some basic access on things. So as an example, you can do something like this dot context, and you have all of that typical things what you should have access, like you used to have, or like you're having in client-side web part as well. So the development experience is exactly the same. With the Application Customizer, that actually applies on all of these almost, is that you are being essentially given the full power to do whatever you want on render. It's relatively not necessarily the best sample, the application customizer, because this one is just showing an alert. But like mentioned, it doesn't have to be something which is rendering on the UI. It could be something which is running on the background, doing some settings or adding some additional things, or it could be Google Analytics or whatever analytics service you're using within your intranet as well. Full flexibility, what you want to do. Now, let's move into that slightly more complex solution. I'm going to show those ones in practice as well. So let's actually close up the web parts. Let's go to the extensions. That list header, which you saw in my demo. Let's go to the on render. There we go. This is a React component, a React implementation, but this is already showing that placeholder to get access on the page header of the page. So through the this.context placeholders, you can actually get an instance to the well-known locations in a page, and we start with the page header. We'll be extending that in the future. If we get the placeholder, then we're essentially just rendering the React components, and then it's again up to us what we want to do. Essentially, you have full control to do whatever you want to do inside of, for example, for this div, which you're essentially getting. Technically, we obviously want people to remain inside of that div, but obviously technically you can do whatever you want. We can't limit you from technology perspective because it's a JavaScript, so you can do technically whatever you want on the page. Now, on the field customizer, let's actually have a quick look on that one as well. Almost the same story. So if the field customizer is attached to a field, and I'll come back on how these things are being attached in a second. It's the on-render cell, essentially, which is the one where SharePoint has realized that there's a client-side component on the field, and it's just requesting you to render out the value. And then it's really up to you what you want to do and how do you render the value out. In this particular implementation, it's nothing more than the fact that if, let's see, I'm scrolling down, where's my render? There's my render. If we should show private data, essentially, if the mouse is on top of the field, let's actually show the private data. Otherwise, let's actually use plart cell, essentially hide the value of the field. So it's nothing more than that from a implementation perspective, because that's a CSS trick to make that happen. But again, up to you. This is relatively simplistic scenario because we're just overriding the style. And when the mouse is over the field, let me come back on the list, just show you that. When the mouse is over the field, it is actually switching the style on fly, and then you can actually see the value of the field. But you can do much more than this, and that's not really the limiting factor. Good. And one thing which I didn't technically show on there is the commands. So we do have also the command set extensions. And for example, for this demo, there's 2 commands which are not hooked into that list. I do apologize on that. But you can essentially define custom commands and command IDs within your code, contact user or open class. And then within your code, essentially, you can do, okay, whenever there's a open class, I'll throw up a new open dialog or pop-up dialog on that page, and then pass in the selected row so that we can show additional details of the item and so on. And that's essentially the third customization option with the modern extensions in SharePoint Online. Now, one thing what I wanted to quickly show, because then you create this, and awesome, I've developed this, and how do I actually make these things then available and enabled on the site? So this is a SharePoint Framework solution, I like client-side solution. So SharePoint Framework solutions do need to get deployed on the app catalog. And that's really the key difference if you consider this one comparing to the classic JS Link and user custom actions, if you're familiar with that model. Now, because this requires that the tenant administrator has approved these scripts because these are running in the context of the user. So this is a security requirement or control requirement. Well, not necessarily a requirement, but it's a controlling step so that the tenant administrator or a person to whom tenant administrator has given the permissions to upload applications here is able to actually get that application available. And whenever we are uploading the solution in the app catalog, that means that the solution is then available to be installed on a site. Now, we're looking into having this in a much more streamlined in the future. So if your solution is that kind of a solution which should be hooked in to all of the sites immediately, automatically, you can actually design that and do the settings in your solution package. We're looking into doing that. Hopefully that will go through. So you don't have to explicitly install the application to all of the sites, because we do understand the complexity and the implications of that one as well. And then when the solution is available in the site, the SharePoint Framework solution is available within the for lists and the sites to take advantage. Now, in our SharePoint Framework solution, unless I'm using the solution feature framework provisioning techniques or executing JavaScript to make some happen automatically, which might have permission issues, these things do not light up automatically. You need to explicitly still enable them in fields or in the user custom collections. And like mentioned, you can use, for example, feature framework to make that happen as part of your SharePoint Framework solution installation. That's one option. The second option, again, depending on how you are creating your site collections, is simply to use code or alternative options as well. So this is a super simplistic, let me slightly zoom this. Super simplistic piece of CSOM code, could be a REST code as well, could be JavaScript, doesn't matter. I'm a classic C# guy, or classic farm solution guy actually, so I use CSOM for doing this. And what I'm doing here is that I'm essentially taking instance to the user custom action collection. Then I'm saying that that's an application customizer. It's a script link, so it will be rendered as a embedded JavaScript on the site collection. And then I'm saying with the new property, which we released, I think in February CSM or this one was in the March CSM release for SharePoint Online. I'm essentially saying, hey, SharePoint, you should have this kind of an application customizer available within this site collection. And whenever a user is rendering anything, please make sure that we're rendering that JavaScript on the page as well. And that way SharePoint knows the render that. Essentially, SharePoint renders the page. It realizes, hey, there's a user custom action. Oh, this is a modern user custom action with the client-side component ID. Great. Do we have a component in the application catalog or in our manifests in the application catalog site available? Oh, yes, we do. Awesome. I'm going to render that as part of my page as well. And almost with the same story with fields as well. So let me uncomment that. So I'm getting an instance to the field, and then the field has a client-side component ID. I'm able to hook in my custom component to the field. These things actually do have one additional property as well. So quickly explaining this one, which I won't be able to explain in a build demo because we're running out of time in build. It's a 1 hour session, so we will be rushing. But related on the client-side components or the SharePoint Framework extensions, you are able to also have client-side component properties. And this is actually a JSON kind of a JSON definition. So you're able to say something like type equals, let's say, foo-fa. And what it means is that your code can now read this property within a code, and whatever the property is doing within your code is able to adapt on that. And the reason for that one is that then essentially you can have one instance of the code, but then you're able to parametricize that instance based on the location where it's actually being used. So you're able to add this additional instructions for the client-side component and then change your implementation based on that. And that's pretty cool as well. Already kind of considering the next steps and requirements and how to parameterize instances and all of that. I'm not going to go too detailed on the development experience because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the questions, because I can imagine that there's quite a few questions now in window. Like mentioned, I do apologize. I do not have two screens, so I can follow up on the discussion. But maybe one thing to mention on the development experience around this one. So right now, when we go to the dev preview pretty soon, not today and not yesterday, within weeks rather than months, but pretty soon we'll go to dev preview and we will keep this available within the package section and also in the first release tenants, or that's the thinking right now. We will not have a workbench experience for doing development with extensions, and we do understand that it's a pity. But what it means is that you need to be able to do development and testing of these things within the SharePoint side. Now, we do have tricks on doing that. We will record a video. Essentially, you are able to host these extensions. In my case, in this site, these are actually being hosted from CDN. Well, SharePoint CDN, actually, which is this folder in here, but it's using the Office 365 CDN. But as a developer, and you're able to host these from your on-premises local box as well, using the local host model. But you would be testing them on a live site because the workbench can't really, it doesn't have this kind of ad hoc list creation and how does it actually render the stuff behavior. So but you're able to essentially say with a certain query parameters here that, hey, SharePoint, I do explicitly tell you that I want to do some debugging with these components and do load them from my on-premises local host. You're able to have that, let's say, connected development experience when you're developing and testing what's actually happening within the SharePoint UIs. But we'll come back on all of those details. We will have tutorials available, videos available on how to get started. Tutorials will concentrate on, hey, let's create a field customizer and let's do a small modification and get it deployed. Here we go. Now this is how it works and all of that. So all of that is pretty much, well, I wouldn't say done, but we do have an early versions of all of those tutorials already waiting. So whenever we are locking down the version, which is going live, we'll push out the packages, we'll push out videos, documentation, all of that at the same time. Cool. I didn't want to steal anything more than time than this. I've been talking now as a monologue in 30 minutes. So let's do this. Let's flip back on the slide. So you don't see my Skype screen because it doesn't make any sense. And then if there's any specific questions, apparently there has been a long discussion on the Iron window already. But if there's any specific questions around this one, just actually shoot away. I think I actually, one moment. I think I added one. Yes. Before we go to the QA section and for questions which I didn't, which Patrick couldn't answer or somebody else didn't answer, quick note on this one as well. So now today in the build, obviously we're pointing out that we already have a GA for web parts in SharePoint Framework. We will keep on evolving the web parts as well. We will start the extensions preview pretty soon with an application customizer, command set customizer, and field customizer. We're looking into enabling adding, well, for example, SharePoint Framework development using outputting, adding functionalities as well. So if your requirement is that, hey, I cannot embed the JavaScript on a site, I need to have security isolation, the addings is still absolutely 100% a valid solution as well. And looking into other future options as well. So the SharePoint Framework will gradually expand and provide additional capabilities as we move along with this journey. But I think that was the last slide what I had, and now we can start answering questions because I think there might be a few. SP request executor obsolete. Thanks for SPFx abilities. Yep, that probably is related on the above discussion. Wasn't full-page apps on the roadmap? Yes, that's mentioned in our roadmap page from Russell. We're looking into that. It is still in our backlog, but it's not something which we explicitly want to say that this is coming super soon. It might be actually. It's waiting for our final prioritization. Right now, we're concentrating on polishing the web parts and then making sure that the extensions are heading to the dev preview and getting our feedback on the extensions. So we can use CSUM to customize groups with the new customization types. You can use CSUM to associate these extensions to SharePoint sites or group sites as well. That is correct. Yes, on Leo's comment. So, because we need to somehow, you can use feature framework, you can use CSUM, you can use REST, you can use multiple other, well, not that many other options, but still to hook in that customizer, either to user custom actions or then to the field section. Question, will we be able to use Graph HTTP client to call one of our things, Web API Azure Functions secured with Azure AD, something which isn't the Graph? I'm guessing that some access token is automatically added, so if I register an AAD app, grant permissions in the SharePoint identity format, that might be all possible. So on the Graph client, which was mentioned in the yesterday's blog post as well, which will be there. It's essentially what we're doing is that we're enabling OpenID Connect across all of the services within SharePoint Online, but with a subset of services and subset of scopes when we start with. The initial value and initial access will be from SharePoint Framework and for SharePoint towards Graph, and there will be limited scopes in the Graph endpoint, and I do apologize, we were looking into extending that as well. So when we start, you cannot actually secure the access token against your custom web API, but that's absolutely in the long run in the roadmap. We're looking into getting that to happen as well. The webcast which we released on this Monday does actually show how to securely call an Azure function from SharePoint Framework, but that's only for authentication, not for authorization. So essentially you can secure your connection between SharePoint Framework and a custom web API or Azure function using the guidance which was shown in the this week's webcast, and there's a guidance article coming up on that one as well. But that doesn't mean that you're able to get an access token and pass that access token to the web API. It means that you would have to then use app only or specific account when you're calling back from the SharePoint back to SharePoint or calling external services from the web API. Good. Any plans to let us know, let us add customizers to the field through the UI rather than needing the right code? We're looking into making that simpler in the future. Right now, again, this is hitting the dev preview relatively soon. So this is early still. It's not alpha, but we're getting there. So all of that feedback is super valuable. We know that it should be more easily doable. Do you know when SPFx German language bug will be fixed? No idea. But right now, if you have any issues on SharePoint Framework, when you're registering them to SPDev docs issue list, those are actually getting replicated, those issues, to our VSDO. So our engineering is looking into those, and we're prioritizing those items. I do not have a timeline for that particular thing. Good. Is there a link for beginners to start with? Yes. And Sumit is referring to tutorials. Well, that's a sample tutorial. That's actually a good point. But if you're looking into getting started on SPFx, the easiest way to find the location is SPFx tutorials. And that's AKMS SPFx tutorials. That's where we have, that's in the dev.ops.com/SharePoint, official location for all of the development documentation on SharePoint, where we have then tutorials which are linking into videos and all of that. So you're able to kind of gradually learn how to do a SharePoint framework. Good. Yes, me and my AKA. Yes, there's quite a few of them. There is videos on YouTube. Yes, there is. Will we have a page layout customizations in roadmap, like defining zones where we put web parts and so on? Yes, so that's not explicitly, so again, this falls into responsibilities of our internal engineering teams. So technically, the page isn't part of the SharePoint framework, but obviously we're working as a SharePoint engineering to make sure that you can have multiple different layouts on the modern pages as well. And there will be new announcements around that one pretty soon, and it is absolutely in our roadmap. Good. Any other questions? We have 6 minutes. Can't wait to extend my SharePoint dev experience with the new features. Yeah. And recommending getting a bit Azure time to do your VMs so you have a fresh experience. Yeah, that's true as well. So it's not a bad idea to use, let's say, a VM in Azure to pull down the packages so you have a clean machine, which is how to make that happen. We do have the video which is recorded where I'm showing how to set up your development environment. I'm using a completely clean Windows 10 environment. And I think it took me 12 minutes to get started on the development, which is pretty decent. To get all of the requirements and setups and everything else installed and get even the Yeoman templates on the machine as well. When should we expect the preview to be available? I would say rather weeks than months, but pretty soon. I cannot give you a date. So, is the video on YouTube? So we do have AKMS link for that one as well. AKMS SPFx videos is our SharePoint development video channel under the PMP umbrella. PMP umbrella does actually nowadays mean all of our development guidance in the SharePoint engineering. So you can easily access those videos as well. Just double checking that I'm not missing anything. Do you say something about not needing to install a new extension type on site-by-site basis, or did I miss that? Good question from Leo. So right now, when we go to the dev preview, you need to install those one by one on the site to be able to have that extension available within the site. We do understand absolutely that that's not an optimal situation if you need to. If you have hundreds of thousands of site collections and all of that. So we need to get that one solved. It is absolutely in our roadmap to make that model more simpler. Out of interest, what stops me for updating JavaScript on my CDN, which is associated to the application customizer, so that the new model gives a registration of JS, which goes through tenant administrator, but what stops the JS implementation being subsequently changed? Now, theoretically, nothing. So you can actually, and that's one of the things why we had a webcast related on organizational considerations and administrative considerations. One of the key points within the webcast was that you need to understand where your customizations are being hosted and the SLAs and the contractual situation on that. Now, technically, when you're creating a new version of a SharePoint framework or modifying JavaScript and bundling a new version of your SharePoint framework solution, you actually do get a new Java. How would I put it? We are hashing the JavaScript implementation and file again. So there is a new version of the JavaScript file, and unless you do manual fixing, that won't be catched by the existing customization without you adding the package again on the app catalog. Now, we know that that's not optimal necessarily for certain scenarios. In certain scenarios, it might be optimal, and we're looking into having that as an optional thing. To would be able to, in your solution package, say, hey, I want actually my JavaScript implementation and files to be renamed as part of this new version, use the existing names, and the things would be still intact. Good. Because the data is stored in a Microsoft Graph, so is so critical for building engaging web application. Today we announced new the Graph HTTP client to accessing Graph. So that's we kind of touched that one. I think it was a question from Chris, but it is the OpenID Connect, which is now enabled within the Office 365. So in your SharePoint framework, you can request well, in your JavaScript implementation, you can request an access token, which you can use to get access on additional services in SharePoint in Office 365. In SharePoint Framework, we will give you a Graph HTTP client, so you don't actually need to do any additional hooks and stuff to get that access token. And then you're able to call certain Graph endpoints and to get access on that. We'll start with a subset of scopes, so it will be a subset of things, but a subset of things exposed from the Graph. But we'll get better on the we'll add additional scopes on the permissions as we move along. And the custom API, yes, the custom APIs with the access token is in the roadmap. The webcast which we released this week is showing how to call a custom web API, but not with an access token, but in a secured way, but not with an access token. So there are small nuances on that. But for example, in Sebastian's case, I know that Tommy Tavela was super excited when he had a look on that webcast and was like, oh, Holy Grail is open. Now we can do X and Y and Z in a secured way. Yes. Good. We're getting there. And we're hitting, by the way, on the hour as well, so not that many questions. I think we went through the graph. Cool. I think it's time to close up. But hopefully an interesting webcast and awesome updates. Absolutely. Super excited. We're super excited in engineering to be able to actually talk about these things as well, because we know that you guys have been asking this one and these capabilities already for a long time. We know to ask. We understand it has to happen. We've been working on that, and we have been unable to actually tell when it's coming on. But super excited on finally being able to talk about those things. Now, in 2 weeks, when we have a following SIG on May 25th, let's actually talk about the options more, talk about the scenarios more, and probably a few more demos and all of that. So all of the good stuff to be covered there as well. And obviously community demos. Patrick, you want to probably close up as well?
Yep, awesome stuff. Thanks, Vesa. Thanks, everybody, for joining the call. I think it's really exciting updates. It's going to be really exciting once we can get those out to Dev Preview so folks can start playing with them. I've played with them a little bit. Really cool stuff, really exciting. Thanks, Vesa, for the time and the great demos. And thanks to all of you for joining. See you guys on May 25th. Bye.
Bye-bye.